Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. Now we open the floor for your questions, remarks. Start with this direction or the other one? Silvina. Okay. Yes, we start with it.
Thank you. First of all, they were both fascinating talks, and I have a question and a comment. The question is for Andrea. In the data that you showed of refugees in Ecuador, I was struck to see that there was no reference to Haitian refugees or migrants. Given the large flow of Haitians to Brazil, many of whom pass through Ecuador, and I wonder if they turn up in other areas of your research, or if they're invisible to the official data. And then the comment is for Arie. In the context of the patterns of human trafficking that you described, I'm struck by how strong the parallel is to the circulation of people under slavery and following the emancipation and abolition of slavery. So I really appreciated, for instance, the way that we frequently bring the United States into discussions about Latin America. You also spoke about Canada, which was a site of refuge for slaves fleeing slavery in the United States. In the Circum-Caribbean, in the aftermath of slavery, descendants of slaves become workers for United Fruit or for the Panama Canal Zone. So there's a kind of a circulation of economic migration following slavery. And then that border zone between the United States and Mexico is a very significant one for not just contemporary migration and these fantasies about walls, but then historically Texas plays one of the most dubious roles in the history of the Americas as a place where slavery was abolished and then reestablished. Abolished when it was part of Mexico and then reestablished when it became part of the United States. And so there's a historical context of the circulation and restriction of circulation of peoples that maps very closely to the patterns that you described in this contemporary context, which I thought was a really interesting parallel.
Thanks, Jerry. Silvina.
En español. Bueno, muchísimas gracias a los dos. Y una pregunta para Andrea. Bueno, primero me pareció súper importante tu trabajo y me pareció muy interesante la forma en que usas el concepto de interseccionalidad, que está muy claro. Me convenció menos tu análisis de los estereotipos dentro de las fuerzas policiales, porque me pareció hasta incluso que hubiera sido como una respuesta obvia sin necesidad de que hagas entrevistas. Entonces la pregunta es, ¿qué más nos podrías decir o qué más podrías profundizar o complejizar para analizar las actitudes de los policías? Porque encontrar en determinado tipo de fuerzas, como por ejemplo los policías que estén controlando las zonas limítrofes, estereotipos negativos con respecto a los movimientos de población, yo diría que es casi un axioma. Entonces, digamos, ¿cómo podés complejizar eso para que nos des un poco más de información, incluso de las motivaciones o qué es lo que lleva a estos policías a denigrar a estas mujeres, en especial a las colombianas?
David.
A couple of questions. Arie, you were talking about how difficult it is sometimes to determine in cases what human trafficking is. Is human trafficking always by force? And does the data help decide if force is used or not? And for Andrea, do any of these police behaviors come from above? So is it part of a kind of a conditioning of police during training to think in a particular way? Or is there an explicit policy for police to behave in a certain way, including everything from opinions about Colombians to sexual abuse? Does that come from higher up than the individual?
Andrea, quiero continuar lo que te dijo Silvia, la pregunta de Silvia. Bueno, tú sabes que la inmigración mayor colombiana de estos desplazados, de estos forzados, se dio en países como México, Guatemala, Honduras, mucho más que Ecuador. Entonces la pregunta que yo me hago es si estas conclusiones, tanto en Women Show Different Form of Agency, como la Relationship between Official Perception y lo que tú llamabas Intersectional Discrimination, si no crees tú que esto hay que también checarlo en otros países donde las mujeres colombianas han emigrado, sobre todo me parece a mí muy importante México y El Salvador. Y otra cosa porque los números que tenemos, no los tengo yo, de México son 287.000 refugiados, ahora son las últimas, 287.000 refugiados colombianos, y en El Salvador 289.000, en Guatemala 251.000. Si comparas estas cifras con la de Ecuador, vas a ver que son mucho mayores estas. Yo me pregunto, y esta es la principal pregunta, si tú crees que la percepción puede cambiar en un país como el de la mujer colombiana, esa percepción negativa, prejuiciosa, en un país como distinto, como Ecuador, como El Salvador o México respecto de Ecuador. Esa es concretamente mi pregunta.
Andrea, I would like to add one more question. If you know if the treatment given to women refugee nowadays from Venezuela to Ecuador, do they receive also the same treatment? And also I would like to know about public opinion in Ecuador vis-a-vis this treatment of Colombian women by the police. Is there any reference to this phenomena in the public opinion in Ecuador? We start with Andrea.
Okay. Do you hear me? Yes. Well, I'm going to. Is it possible? I will answer to those who ask me in Spanish, and to those who answer. Yeah. Anyway. So. I'm going to start with you. Yeah. I'm sure that the migration, estoy segura que la migración hacia México y El Salvador también es bastante grande en el caso de los colombianos, pero en Ecuador se registran más de 300.000. Hay más refugiados colombianos en Ecuador que en cualquier otro país de la región. Aparte es un país más pequeño que México, bueno, que El Salvador no, pero que México. Y en cuanto a si pudiera ser diferente el tratamiento o la percepción que hay sobre los colombianos en esos países, no estoy tan segura al respecto. Sé que la percepción sobre colombianos en cuanto al tema de criminalidad, a esta general percepción que existe sobre los colombianos, sobre todo el colombiano varón y su vinculación con el narcotráfico o con, en este caso, el lavado de dinero, entre otros, es algo que no solamente se limita a América Latina, ¿no? Que es algo que se observa en todo el mundo, ¿no? De hecho, las mismas telenovelas, series como Narcos, entre otras, han de alguna manera reforzado esa imagen del colombiano a nivel internacional de delincuente, de narcotraficante, de narco, ¿no? Entonces, eso hay que tenerlo muy en cuenta. Y es normal escuchar en Berlín, en Tel Aviv, de Colombia, o escuchar algún comentario en los aeropuertos, entre otras cosas, ¿no? Pero la discriminación que se observa en Ecuador es bastante interesante porque es algo de lo que se habla muy recientemente, o por lo menos desde la transición a la democracia, o más adelante incluso. Mi investigación de archivo demuestra que esto viene de mucho más atrás, ¿no? Cuando no existía una migración incluso masiva de colombianos hacia el Ecuador todavía, ¿no? Entonces, yo diría que precisamente por el ser países vecinos, por el tema de la frontera tan cercana y y también las cosas que se han dado, ¿no? Hablamos del tema de Angostura, todas el asesinato de Raúl Reyes allá y la intervención de Colombia en la soberanía ecuatoriana, entre otras cosas, han generado mucha controversia que es particular del caso ecuatoriano, ¿no? Entonces eso también hay que mirar un poco también al contexto para diferenciar un poco cuál es no solamente la percepción de la policía, pero sino de la gente, de la ciudadanía en general hacia o sobre los colombianos y colombianas. En cuanto a la otra pregunta, well, I'm going to go back to the English and then I'm going to go back to yours. So, yeah, en español, inglés, lo que sea. So, Asians, you asked me, right? Haitianos. Yeah, that is actually a more recent migration, but it is not comparable to the migration that we have received from Venezuela or from Colombia. And so that's the reason why we don't see many of the numbers of these citizens on the statistics from the government, actually, or from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, yes, there are some there is public opinion about the Haitians in Ecuador, and it's somehow negative as well, but not as, and of Cubans, for example, as well. But it is not really something that it's very, very big or very complicated there, like the situation of Venezuelans and Colombians for the moment. With regard to your question, you asked me something that if where is this perception or this behavior, these attitudes coming from, where basically, for those of you who are familiar with the concept of police culture, this is something very, I mean, the stereotypes and the prejudices are part of police work because they are on the streets, it's what this concept tells us. It is very general from all the police officers. What is interesting, and I think that answer both questions, yours as well, is that many of the police officers, when I ask them, why do you think in that way, or what do you believe Colombians are the responsibles for the criminality here in Ecuador, because that's what they thought, that they were to be blamed for the criminality in Ecuador, they said, because I saw that on the press. So the answer was not that they capture a lot of Colombians, because Colombians made of, I think, less than 2% of the population behind bars, and less than 2% of the arrests in Ecuador. But what they answered constantly was that they saw that on the headlines of the media. And that is interesting, because even the media is shaping the perceptions of police officers in a way that is detrimental to those who come into contact with the police. So, yeah, I will say that is something interesting that maybe I'm sure I didn't mention. I don't know if I'm missing someone or someone. I think you can continue.
Okay. I got two questions. Jerry, and that's the beauty that you're an historian. You look at the longue durée, right? And here, Stefano, I'm going to bother you because remember, I mean, you co-organized with Thomas Rise the areas of limited statehood. I don't remember right now, but there was a Mexican historian. I was in that panel, and it was incredible that he was looking at, you know, colonial history of those areas where the Portuguese and the Spanish did not have access, so there was some kind of indigenous autonomy. Right. So, and what is interesting is that the cases he was referring in the Americas are precisely the usual suspects that we took, namely U.S.-Mexico border, the northern triangle of Central America, the Colombian borders, and the TBA, which is the triple frontier, right, that we heard yesterday of Brazil, Paraguay and Argentina. So there seems to be a pattern here, right, that has to do with, you mentioned circulation of slavery, and Federico La, he was talking...
That was the free-floating peoples that were not controlled by
Yes,
the
yes.
nomads.
Right. So there seems, if we are looking for patterns and not just starting in the post-Cold War period, right, here we go. Now, to your question, David, and we had this exchange before, the sources that we look were sources from the United Nations Office Drugs and Crime, right? There are reports, and the U.S. Department of State. So basically, we have a footnote where we say we include transnational human trafficking and smuggling flows that they are highlighted in at least one of these reports and based on captures of victims, including illegal migrants in the destination country. Okay? But as you comment to me before, there might be other cases that are undocumented. But what I think that it should be clear, because that was your question, we should differentiate it, which sometimes we confuse between human smuggling and human trafficking. I think the element of human trafficking, as far as I understand, there is a fourth dimension there. Human smuggling is kind of voluntary, right? Where illegal migrants, they want to ask for services of third parties, non-state actors that we call malign non-state actors, transportistas, coyotes, etc. The problem is that you have a slippery slope, because what starts as human smuggling might develop into human trafficking, and that's cases that you might refer to, or cases that you were asking regarding a Venezuelan, that was the question, right? Venezuelan woman nowadays in the last 3 years, right? So in that sense, the voluntary dimension is in human smuggling, but it's voluntary to some extent, right? Because then it might develop into human trafficking.
Okay, we are running out of time, so thank you very much. Thank all of you. Thank you all of you.